Daniel, it's such a pleasure to get you on the podcast after some period of back and forth.
Yep. The times don't make it really easy at the moment to find time, but yeah.
Of course.
Finally, we made it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I appreciate that. And it's not easy to find time, especially on a weekday in the middle of the week. And I thank you for the investment that you're giving me. I know you have your family, your kids. It's almost an investment of your precious asset, which is your time that you're giving to me. And for the people who I promised that they will be able to listen to someone who has been through things and can share the experience and also inspire, most importantly, inspire individuals to either take the same path or at least think about in that role. So welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Again, I'm new to the whole video podcasting thing. So, I'm still trying to get a hang of it, but I don't want to play the template. So I want to break the template and just build how I feel it should be. So, we'll not try to make it more formal or as jazzy as some of the YouTubers of the new generation do, but we'll keep it simple as much as possible.
Appreciate it. I think I'm too old for the younger YouTube generation.
Super. So maybe we start from what matters first is if you can quickly introduce yourself to the people who will be watching, listening to this podcast. Tell us a little bit about yourself, your journey to what you are today.
Sure. Hello, my name is Daniel. I currently work as a principal engineer at Zalando. It's a big-ish European tech company. I originally joined the company in 2016 as a senior engineer, walked my ranks up, went into management for a while, even tried out another company, and in Corona decided to come back. And yeah, now I'm a principal engineer, back on the IC path. In my private life, like you said, I have a family, 2 kids in school, which is, especially in Corona times, quite exhausting at times. But yeah, so far we are getting through it in a good way. Let's put it like this. So no one had COVID so far. Knock on wood.
Yes, I think that's good. Knock on the wood, I already did. And also,
fingers crossed, of course.
Fingers crossed. Yeah. In the role of principal engineer, tell us a little bit about how does your day look like if you have a typical day? And I know it varies from people to people. If you had to describe your day, what would it look like?
There is no template of a day for me. I would say every day has a different focus in a way. So there are days where I'm very invested into overarching principle topics. There are days where I'm working very closely with the teams. There are days where I actually have to focus because being a principal in Zalando means a lot of reading, commenting, and writing documents. And I can do this best if I have time in a block. I'm not very good at, you have 10 minutes here or there, and then you can just quickly focus on this. Especially when I want to write something, I just need to, like back in the engineering days, right? You need to get into the zone, if you will. And so, yeah. Other than that, I mean, it's actually not a lot of emails. Chat is the dominant thing today, I guess, for everyone. in Corona times. And yeah, a lot of documents. I think in Zalando, the common theme or joke is my IDE is Google Docs. So I rarely write code, almost none anymore. Before the last Cyber Week, I wrote a few lines, but nothing super big. But I think it also varies from principal assignment to principal assignment. So at my current assignment, or in the area I'm currently working in, which is an area called CE platforms, client engineering platforms in Zalando, it's about tracking and other internal platformy teams we have. And yeah, it's for me, it's not a lot about coding. It's a lot about writing documents and reading documents and commenting documents. But in other areas, you can almost see there's this super senior role of a principal where you're actually still coding a lot. But Will Larson has this. He wrote this, he actually didn't write it, right? He collected stories from other staff and principal engineers and different stereotypes. So there is absolutely this super senior. My role is more of I'm maybe a consulting architect at the moment.
Okay. And I think obviously we had some overlaps when I was at Zalando, and you had a different role at that point in time.
Yeah, I was engineering manager in Search, and you were in the.
I was in different places. I was in first customer experience, so home, checkout, wish list, and PDP teams, and then I moved to size and fit in Zalando. But I think I met you mostly when I was working on collections with Mikio and you.
Yeah, collections were a thing back then.
Back then, the good old days.
Yeah.
It's interesting to note that, as you said, that you now play the role of principal engineer, and obviously we will touch upon the different archetypes that Will Larson talked about and how that also applies in your current role versus other principal engineers that you know of or your peers. But I want to go back a little bit before I come to principal engineer focus. What led to this transition from you being an engineering manager to the principal direction?
The blunt answer to this is basically in COVID times, my private and family life was not too consuming, but it was difficult to arrange a manager's schedule with just my private situation. In Corona, I mean, we had lockdowns. My kids were at home all day. Now they are both in school. Back then, only my older daughter was in school. And so we actually had to homeschool. And homeschooling in Germany is not the best. The digitalization in German schools, especially in the public schools, lags behind. Let's put it like this. And so, yeah, it was a deliberate move, also because the technical side of being an engineering manager was always my strong suit. So I never completely left this part. So it was for me, it was an easy transition. It was not a okay, now I have a completely different role and I don't know what to do with stuff. So yeah, the private situation played a huge part in this. Maybe the biggest part, actually.
Okay. I think a lot of the people, perhaps coming from a tech background, may have experience in understanding and knowing about engineering manager as a role. But I want to use this a lens of you being an engineering manager and looking at a principal engineer role. And if you had to really call out those distinct differences that are perhaps more visible, less subtle, uh, what would be those differences when you look at from an playing as engineering manager versus what you are doing right now in the role of principal engineer?
I mean, there are these obvious differences, right? As an engineering manager, um, you are a lot closer in touch with the people because you're actually managing them, right? But you're also more in touch with the project management aspects. It's a lot about roadmaps and status, administrativa, maybe is the right word. As a principal engineer, my focus is at the moment more on are we sure we're building the right things or we are moving in the right direction from a technical point of view. It's maybe not a consulting role, but it's certainly like the role itself is has a lot more aspects of influencing over time than really dictating the path or this is what we do now or this is what we don't do. So yeah, it's more influencing than actually saying what to do. I mean, yes, of course you can do that, but at the end of the day, and then we are coming to the similarities of the role. At the end of the day, you always need to influence people and take the people with you. So if you as a principal just go and say, this is the way we build it, and it's either my way or the highway, then it also doesn't work in a way, right?
Right.
You have to take people with you. And that's has been, at least for me, always like in the back of my mind.
Mm. And when you say that, I think this is such a powerful phrase, like thinking about and steering towards, are we building the right thing? What is in the role of principal engineer that enables you to do that in your role today, to help teams to know that we are building the right thing?
You have a lot more contact to other teams outside of your direct kind of sphere of influence. You also have a lot more, or have to have a lot more background into how the business works and what are the business needs that you have or we have. So it's also in a way a mix of a technical role, but in a way sometimes even being or having some kind of a head of a product manager. At least in my current thinking and in my current role as part of the platform team, there are certainly aspects of product management and how do you build a platform from a technical perspective.
Right.
And what are the capabilities this platform needs and doesn't have today? Or what are the things that kind of we have we have built in the past that we don't need anymore today? Because getting rid of technical debt is also something that we often don't do good enough.
Right. I think that part is quite standout here because I will obviously come back to that, doing the right thing and making sure we are all doing right thing. And we'll definitely talk about what are the various ways a principal engineer can do that and influence that. But I think one of the key aspects that I picked up is this whole word about influencing.
Yeah.
And maybe we'll stay on this for a moment. And I'm assuming this is kind of a build up on understanding the principal role in general, right? So, what comes to your mind when you talk about the word influence? or as a principal engineer? What does influencing really mean here?
For me, it means sharing my experience, giving guidance. For me personally, it's also a lot about writing things down. It doesn't have to be like a solution design or whatnot. Sometimes it's also just clearly articulating in a written form of what you think about a certain aspect or a certain property, maybe. Especially this writing part has been important for me because at least in the past, especially when I was still a senior engineer, it was always easy to quickly code stuff and write things together. But over time, knowledge is lost, people come and go, and writing helps you to think more clearly about what you actually want to say. And so influencing comes a lot about like this. What are your thoughts on certain aspects of your domain you're working in? Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a good kind of connecting thread about writing. And I think, as you said, influencing is about communicating your intention, right, in a written format, in this case, at your current organization. Let's spend maybe a little bit on the writing medium itself. From working as obviously a senior engineer, spending more time on IDEs, and now moving to Google Docs as your IDE. How was that transition for yourself when you realized that this role is more about just writing? And how was it easy for you to move to this writing as a medium, or you had to deliberately work on getting to that craft?
I think I was a bit lucky in this case. At that point, I was still engineering manager, and there was a planned reorganization of one area in search that we wanted to do, basically around ranking products and going away from a rule engine to something machine learned. And obviously, in an organization at the size of Zalando, that means everyone is interested in this, from the people that actually implement the machine learning algorithms to the buyer of clothes, food, not food, to the buyer of shoes, to the category manager, to the market manager, and everyone rightfully has a say in this in a way. And I was lucky in this case to basically it coincides with one senior executive, now what is he now? Chief Business and Product Officer, Jim. And he took the VP and the head a little bit on the hand, and he kind of guided us through a way of aligning such a transition of strategy, if you will, throughout the whole organization. It took about half a year or so, and this was for me the Kickstarter into getting into writing more clearly, and using writing as a medium to align or to get alignment. And then later, of course, to get my ideas across of how I think about software engineering and architecture. So at that point, I was simply lucky. And that's definitely something I still see today, the way people approach writing documents. like one key learning for me was it's really about it's not about finish. It's not about the finished document. It's about the way you get to this finished document, and that's where the alignment happens. And the moment the document is really reviewed and done, everything is like there's no need to share this document. Like in theory, at least, there's no need to share this document anymore because everyone ideally is already bought in.
So writing as a form of thinking and a form of alignment rather than considering that as a destination, or we have a perfectly written document and then we will get to go over that.
Yeah.
You use this as a process.
Yeah, exactly. Because otherwise, otherwise you end up in a situation where then every stakeholder writes their version or their view of this document. And how do you bring this together? Now you have 10 different documents with views that are not aligned and cannot work together in this way. So yeah, that was an interesting experience.
If obviously in your current role you look at other senior engineers who are aspiring to transition into this role, what do you think they should know, especially on the mode of writing, as we are talking about this part at the moment? How should they approach transitioning their thinking about using writing as a medium to influence as they grow into this role?
I think most of the senior engineers, at least in Zalando, they get in contact with this earlier on because at least the way these writing processes happen in Zalando is senior engineers are part of this writing already. What is something that you definitely have to consider is, like you said, after this transition into principal, your lines of code you write per year drop dramatically. And that's yeah, maybe not for everyone, like I said earlier, but I think in general you should expect to not write a lot of code anymore. Which is another form of writing in a way, right? Writing code. But yeah.
Of course. Talking about writing less code or a different way of influencing through written words, for yourself and maybe the people that you work with who are either in principal role or transitioning to principal role, how do you see the transition from an engineer, from a senior engineer working mostly on, spending more of their time obviously writing documents, but mostly also in writing code, to this transition to spending more time on writing documents and less time writing code? How should they look at this transition? I think for some it might be more like a shock. For some it could be more like, okay, it's almost depriving them of their inherent reason why they came in to this industry, right? And for some it could be seeing themselves perhaps distancing away from the implementation because they don't get to influence that by writing code. What do you say to them as they transition to this role?
Take your time. In general, a good career advice, I think, take your time. Because you will actually, at points, you will miss coding. Yeah. Take your time. And also find a good mentor or sponsor even early on. Because it is a transition, and it also is it's a completely new skill set you have to build. And you cannot get this overnight. it just doesn't work. As any skill, right? Unless we're in the matrix. Yeah, take your time, learn about the business, like really understand how the business side of things works, because that will over time help you to make your job a lot better. I think it's already a clear, not requirement to become a senior, but it's the business side of things should already be on your radar, definitely. Maybe today more than 5 years ago. And yeah, and the business side of things is in a way the thing you want to solve, right? Ultimately, that's the problem you want to really solve. It's not the, I mean, yes, we all want to have the newest frameworks and the newest version of whatnot, but at the end, you need to solve a business problem.
I think it's a quite an important point, and I think this pops up this question, which perhaps I'm assuming a lot of people who are either transitioning to this role or they're looking at this role differently see is, how does you being in this principal engineering role, how do you make sure that you're still connected to the overall mechanics of how systems operate? Obviously, you don't get to code that much, which means you're not directly influencing a system and integration and how it operates, but through, as you said, through documentation, through writing documents and influencing people's choices. But how do you prevent yourself not being in an ivory tower and really grounded in how things are operating at the level where you can see it in them in action?
I think it's actually, there are a number of ways you can still remain grounded. One is definitely consuming a lot of content, reading a lot of blogs, listening to podcasts. At least that's my thing, even though it's the first time recording, but I'm listening a lot to podcasts. And at times, I actually do code, but secretly. No one sees the code. It's only for me to understand if what I'm proposing could actually work. So when I think about how can we rebuild tracking event streams and how can we make them more efficient and with better data quality and you name it, I'm actually going and implementing in a really like simplified toy aspect.
Sure.
Implementing it just to check if it actually makes sense the way I think about it. Another and sometimes you can even go pretty wild and implement stuff. But I think the trick is to actually not show to anyone. Because the code is definitely not production ready. And at the end, I mean, it's also, I don't want, as a principal, I don't want to give the team, here is my half-baked solution, now you do the rest. That does not really instill ownership in any of that. And ownership is something that is just driving people, right? And then we're back at the aspect of, taking people with you while you're on this journey. So yeah, that keeps me grounded at least. Reading and implementing really simple, small toy POCs in an evening, even. Secret.
That's a good point. I mean, especially writing in secret, to validate your ideas, to validate what you're proposing really works.
Yeah.
Let's look at other facets of this role. And, I will do it indirectly. I will not say, hey, tell me everything what a principal engineer does, which would be make it very boring for anyone listening to podcast. But let's make it very interesting in terms of how we get to that. So we talked about influence a bit, right? We talked about writing as a way of generating influence. Talked about validating concepts by building something, maybe in private, maybe in secret, but at least that keeps you grounded. So you're not just thinking and putting some random things in front of people. You have done some bit of validation on that. What are the other facets of this role which keeps you excited and passionate about what you're doing right now?
For me in my current role, I think it's one insight or one reflection I had on myself a while ago. I think ultimately I'm a platform guy. What do I mean by that? I don't know if you know, like Simon Wardley and his, you need pioneer settlers and town planners. I'm definitely more on the settler part, maybe not too hardcore on the town planners, but I'm definitely I definitely see myself as this platform, having a platform mindset. And what keeps me excited is how I can help all in Zalando now, how I can help the engineers in Zalando to become more, not effective, but they have a lot more tools, hopefully in the future, they can leverage to write new features, to write new exciting code, if you will. But eventually it's about like user-facing features and our customer promises, of course. And how I can help them focus on this, focus on the value building and not on the boring setup of stuff. Because I think that's basically it's related to team topologies also, like this concept of cognitive load. I think I want to reduce cognitive load for other teams so that they can really focus on building value on the business side.
Can you give us perhaps maybe not exactly what happens on the ground if you want to protect obviously the internals of what you do at Zalando, but in terms of reducing cognitive load for teams, how does a principal engineer in action does that? How does that pan out? How does reducing cognitive load for teams look like?
I think it's twofold. On the one hand, for me, it's definitely this: where do we need to be in, say, 2 years, and painting this picture of how the systems really should look like and what capabilities we need to enable engineers to really focus on the value building side of things. And then it's a lot about making sure that we are on this path, if you will. There's always a tendency, or the trade-off you have to make as an engineering manager, of finishing this project or making it right. I am definitely more on the let's try to make it right as much as possible side. And then it's also about sometimes helping people to not make too short-sighted decisions and maybe find other ways than this clever hack you came up with. Because over time, these clever hacks make your life really miserable. So yeah, it's where do we want to be from a technical side of view, from a technical point of view, and trying to see where we can leverage other projects and make us sure we get to that point.
Right. I think for me, it's also interesting to see when you provide this feedback to an engineer that, hey, this is a clever hack, and you should be, I think obviously engineers may be aware this is a clever hack, but I think from a point of how does long-term looks like for this clever hack? How does this evolve over a period of time? There's obviously a people aspect of it, right? Which we cannot trade away.
Yeah.
If I am a principal engineer, just go into someone, hey, clever hack, let's not have any clever hacks. This will break your system. I think we generally need some level of people skills and also building some level of, I would say, relationship with engineers so that you can leverage your skills of influencing in a way which does not feel like micromanagement or basically pushing back on everything. How do you do that in your current role, as you are not obviously you're not, people don't report to you, so you have to focus on, okay, what is that you have in front of you with the capabilities you have and the leverages that you have in order to build that type of relationship with engineers so that you can give this feedback directly to them. Tell me a little bit about that aspect of it.
For me, it all goes a lot back to having empathy. I strongly believe that no one wants to do a bad job. Everyone wants to be successful and everyone wants to make a good job. And what helps is you also need to understand their point of view. What are the constraints they are working under? What are the time pressures they might have? And then it's about finding a balance. Like, yes, sometimes there's no other way around. You have to make this clever hack. Sometimes you can avoid it because maybe some assumptions got lost along the way. And actually, until this requirement has reached an engineer, there was so many, lost in translation moments that actually for example, the analyst, what they really needed is maybe not what is ending up on the engineer's plate. And then it's also about uncovering those kinds of communication issues that also just happen, right? In any organization, in any large team, you always have these translation errors that you then need to well, if you're lucky, you can uncover them, and it's a simple kind of undoing of the hack or preventing the hack. But it's also sometimes, there's no other choice, and then it's something that, I, as a principal at least, what is then in my power is to make sure that everyone understands that we are making a deliberate choice of adding something that is technical debt tomorrow. And we have to undo over time. So deliberate choices and. But eventually it's like you have to understand all involved parties. And usually no one is evil. Of course, some people are. That happens. But so far I've been successful with always assuming the best of people.
Okay, I think as we are kind of slowly getting to the last parts of our conversation, I'll make it a little more dramatic and also a little controversial. Okay, so
Okay.
every every role has good parts and hard parts, right? What are the hard parts of a principal engineer role that you either have encountered or you have seen people running into?
I mean, the hard part for me is definitely maybe not as much about me being a principal, but about me being me. Um, I definitely have issues saying no to topics, and I personally, I see I see things as I wouldn't say oversimplifying, but if I look at a certain domain or a certain area, um, I definitely sometimes cannot like, in my opinion, an area might be wrongly set up from a technical point of view, and then that's something where I cannot keep my mouth shut.
Mm.
Which then means you're suddenly in a lot of different topics at the same time. So it sometimes can be a lot of context switching, um, even between meetings from now to a minute later. So yeah, sometimes there are definitely days where even as a principal, I've had so many meetings that I'm just, okay, I turn off the computer and that's it for the day. Where I see others struggling is, yeah, some of the stuff we talked about earlier. Um, yes, if you present your final document to everyone and say, "Here, that's it," then yes, you will struggle in your role
Mm.
because you will not get the alignment that you are effectively seeking to get. Yeah, is that controversial enough?
I think you played it safe. It could be controversial, but you played it really nicely. Let's try to even maybe ramp up it, okay?
Yeah.
So I think when I talk to some principal engineers, I think they often get this feeling, especially those who get into this role early on, that you are reviewing a system or a provide in a situation where you're providing feedback and you know the answer. You know what will solve that problem for them, and sometimes you think about, should I just spit out that answer or spit out that direction, or you create an environment where people realize this by asking the right questions or just encouraging them to think about differently. It can also come to the point of, hey, this somebody comes to you and say, hey, this doesn't work, but you said, okay, let me try and make this work because I think I can. Did you get into the state so far in your journey as principal engineer where you were in a state where you knew this would work, but maybe you are getting the inputs differently from the people that were with you, that it's not a good idea? And how was that experience with you, if ever you got through that particular scenario?
Um, I think in tracking in Zalando that you are constantly faced with this. um, it's on different levels. In team internal, it means yeah, having patience, sticking to your arguments. I think the right term is like perseverance.
Mm-hmm.
You have to sometimes take more time to convince people.
Mm.
Invest more time into convincing them in discussions, in written form, in, well, whiteboard sessions remotely kind of works. It's maybe not the best, but it does work. Um, and then really talking it through. This has helped at least in one case last year, and in other cases, it's. I think ultimately it's always in a way the same. sticking to it, keeping behind this, advertising this, explaining this over and over and over again, to different people, to different stakeholders. And then sometimes things happen where suddenly a director of engineering on a completely different organization reads your paper and understands it, and then goes and like, hey, we need this. And then you get buy-in. Maybe not right away, but definitely in the mid to long run. Which is another theme. I think what is the difference between senior and principal? You're definitely you have to think a lot more about the long run of things. Just as an engineering manager, your feedback loops, your feedback loop cycles increase. As an engineering manager, it's more about how you can help people grow. And sometimes your feedback loop cycle is years in this case. And it's also the same as a principal engineer. Like my feedback cycle about getting the systems that we are working with into a state where I want them to be is also years and takes time. So yeah, if you need dopamine, find a side hustle, or I don't know.
I think that really connects this similarity between also these two roles, right? This whole longer term horizon and also cycle time for receiving feedback and really seeing things in working out. Maybe staying on that lane of, ramping a little bit of, no, I would not say controversial. I think you played a beautiful pace and you're playing it very well. I was like, okay, can I push Danny a little bit more? But I think there are organizations where I think transitioning from an engineering manager to individual contributor like principal and going back and forth are quite convenient. I think at Zalando, even when I was there, it was kind of promoted and people really talked about it. But it's not the same rosy situation in all of the organizations. I think we still are in the state where a lot of senior engineers still look at transitioning to a leadership role, not because they wanted it to be, but rather that's the only option to grow in that organization. From your experience, obviously, at Zalando and but also the other places where you have spent your or invested your time, what do we need from the environment in an organization that allows creating that feeling that there are these two different leadership tracks and not one is less than the other, but they are both are leader in their own rights and have their own space. What do you think will help for organizations and people who are working in this organization who may be listening to this podcast to support that transition?
I think you need buy-in from the management side of things. There has to be a clear understanding of there actually are two different leadership tracks and leadership roles. In a lot of organizations, I think the engineering manager is playing both roles of people, project manager, and technical lead. And you need a shared understanding and also willingness from the management side that this is something you want to pursue as an organization. I know in Zalando we have spent a lot of time on this. We even wrote like maybe not memos, but little guidelines or helpers, like how can you leverage your principal engineer best for the management track. There are also there are also documents, memos about how you as a principal can really help define your role together with the manager in this play, if you will. not play, but in this relationship between management and principal. Yeah. Buy-in.
So buy-in is an important word. I think we can spend another probably hours talking about how to get that buy-in, what to create a situation for getting that buy-in separately.
Yeah.
But again, we are almost at the end of it, and I probably have these two things in my mind where I wanted you to comment on or just hear your thinking about it. I think this is also putting you in a very interesting spot because you have been an engineering manager and then you moved to principal engineer. When you look back to engineering manager role outside, that now that you're not playing that role, and not just for yourself, when you look at that role itself, how does that role look differently from outside versus when you were in that role?
From outside the organization, you mean?
Outside of that role, like as a principal, how do you interpret an engineering manager's role?
That's a very good question. I think it again comes back to what's your relationship to management or to your manager counterpart, and how do you build this relationship? What's the difference? Actually, I think in Zalando, at least for me, the difference was present because I saw early on people like Mikio Braun in this, or Fadi is now at Google, and being in this principal role, and it was, at least inside Zalando, it was always a bit clear what the difference is between management and principal. I think in contrast to when Mikio was around, the role today is a lot better defined compared to back then. Yeah. I'm not sure that really does answer your question.
It kind of touches the answer.
Yeah.
So obviously, I mean, I don't want to take your time completely on this. I think the idea was I was trying to get to here is, so for an engineering manager to play their role as expected in an organization, there's an impact that is created by that role.
Yeah.
There are some, basically from a systems thinking, but there are inputs and outputs of that role, right?
Yeah.
And same thing from a principal. And I think what happens is when you are in an engineering manager role, you look outward. You say, okay, what does this person need and what is the outcome of that particular person? Like, what are they delivering? And now that you have been playing that role, you have played the role of engineering manager and you move to a principal role, you may read the engineering manager role differently, or you get a different perspective of that role that perhaps you did not have when you were not in that role, when you were not in the principal role, you were inside the engineering manager role. And I was trying to figure out if there was a change of any perspective on how that role should work, how that role should play, versus now that you are looking at it from outside and you're looking at other engineering managers playing their role rather than where you were doing the same thing. And I was trying to see if there was any difference that you observe from that different perspective that you have. So I think that's the part that I was trying to read, and maybe it was perhaps over analyzing from my side. That could also be one of the ways of thinking about it.
I mean, I think it's always a lot also about the person itself and how you interpret your role. I mean, there's also not this one engineering manager stereotype, right? For me, it was always, how can I help the teams best to make an impact and do the right thing? As an engineering manager, I think my focus was a lot about the broader environment of how teams interact with each other. Now I see this in a similar way, but more from a systems, well, not, it's also systems thinking, but in this case, technical systems, and how they interact with another. So I think basically both roles try, at least for me, in both roles, I try to achieve the same thing, but coming from a different kind of point of view, if you will.
Yeah. I love that answer, by the way. I loved how you framed it. So you have same outcomes but different approaches.
Yeah.
And complementary approaches, because you need both. You cannot just act with one.
I mean, Conway's law, right? It's about the communication, both
Exactly.
verbal and technical.
Absolutely. Perhaps almost at the penultimate state, I think in your role, you also interview other principal engineers and also coach, maybe mentor other engineers who are getting this role. What are the common pieces of advice that you have given to engineers who are getting into this role? And maybe a second part of this question would be, what do you look for someone that you're hiring externally as a principal engineer? Maybe the first part is, I think, would be very interesting, especially when you talk to the people and mentor people, engineers. What do you advise them most commonly as they move towards this role? And we go back to the second question in a moment.
Yeah. I think one thing you have to, or that is something that is very valuable, a skill to have, is this thinking in systems. Not just in technical systems, but also like an organization or people are also, or an organization is also a system, right, and how it lives and breathes. That's something that I found for myself super valuable and insightful. Especially when you come to this, how if you combine this with empathy, trying to understand the other side of the argument or the other business area that you're dealing with. If you have this idea of systems thinking, you don't need to understand all the details of this other person's life, work life. And you don't have to understand all the constraints, but if you roughly understand of how these things play together and how they are influencing each other, I think that has helped me most. And I definitely give this advice to look into this. It was actually a chapter in the other Will Larson book, An Elegant Puzzle, which he wrote before, that got me into this systems thinking. And the best book I've read so far is the classic Donella Meadows, right, Thinking in Systems.
Thinking in Systems. Oh yeah, that's such an enjoyable book.
Yeah. And maybe also in general, reading books. I don't know how many books I've read by now, but this has definitely helped me in better understanding how things work and how I can make how I can be the best I can be in the role I have.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Daniel. And maybe we end with this as the last part of it. I think as you interview also different principal engineering candidates, what are the few dimensions of aspects that you really look at when you hire such candidates? Maybe instead of talking about different aspects of that role, what is maybe the few things that you absolutely expect any principal engineer candidate should have?
You're always dealing with complex systems. both from a technical and a organizational point of view. And what I think is what you have to bring as a principal engineer is the ability to find simple, scalable solutions to these complex problems that we have. We often design, or too often, I think we design complex systems, but scaling a complex system is incredibly difficult and expensive at some point. But if you really come from this, maybe even first principles thinking, and design the system in a simple way, then it's much easier to scale simple systems. There's this great talk by Rich Hickey.
The closure guy, right?
Yeah. The closure guy, exactly. Simple made easy. Actually had its 10-year anniversary last year. So it's a pretty old talk by now. But yeah, simplicity, I think, matters. Because you can also communicate simple things a lot better than complex things.
True.
Yeah. I hope that makes sense.
It does. It does. We are clocking an hour into this, and I deeply enjoyed this conversation. It brought back a lot of good memories from my time. I think some of the points that you mentioned, but also I think, yes, we could have done a better job in going into details about every single aspect of it, and we could have been here for hours. But I think what I enjoyed is you have been very thoughtful in how you framed your ideas and the way you think about this role and how it operates. And also it gives me a good window in how you think about this. So super appreciate your time with me on this.
Thank you. Anytime again with more details.
Of course,
maybe.
The devil is always in there.
The devil is always in the details.
Super. Let's close in then and stop the recording.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming in.